Hey gang! The Black Library Book of the Year 2025 results are out. After taking a look at the winners, we'll have a little yap about what this means for the future of Games Workshop and where it's putting its narrative focus, not just in books, but across the minis and video games. Every year, the Black Library Book of the Year vote is one of the clearest snapshots we get of what Warhammer fans are actually engaging with. This is real people, not critics, voting for the stories that matter to them the most. So when the results lean this heavily in one direction, it's worth paying attention to. It's also always tough with votes like this, as you really need to read the books in order to make a true vote at which is best. Otherwise it's just a popularity contest of one faction over the others. Despite the entirety of Warhammer IP being eligible, the top books were exclusively focused on Warhammer 40k and Horus Heresy.
Number 10. Tombworld by Jonathan D. Beer. Kemet, a disgraced Praetorian charged with protecting her Tombworld as it slumbers, is roused to action once more. This is her chance to prove she is meant for greater things. She will stop at nothing to see it done.
Tombworld is a Necron-focused novel that prioritizes mood, internal perspective, and existential horror over spectacle. Rather than grand dynastic wars, it explores what immortality actually feels like for Necrons. The fragmented memories, the fading identity, and the quiet dread of eternal stagnation. The plot is deliberately slow, focusing on awakening, decay, and the sense that Necron dominance comes at a great cost. It's less about conquering the galaxy and more about being trapped inside a dead empire that already won. I think this came 10th as it has a good, strong atmosphere and theme, but it's also intentionally subdued and introspective, which limits mass appeal, unless you are a massive Necron fan.
Number 9. The Remnant Blade by Mike Vincent. A disgraced Night Lord must deal with infighting and insurrection among his cotter and a bloody-handed rival to maintain his waning grasp on power. Could a new conquest be what he needs to set things right and regain what he has lost?
The Remnant Blade, Night Lord's novel, strips Chaos Space Marines of myth and replaces it with bitterness and rot. The story follows warriors who aren't rising champions of chaos, but exhausted survivors clinging to the violence as identity. There's no glory here, just spite, inertia, and self-awareness. Chaos isn't portrayed as liberation, but as a dead end that traps its followers in endless repetition. The book is small-scale and personal, but brutally honest about what being a traitor Marine actually means.
Number 8. Grotsnik Da Mad Dok by Denny Flowers. Grotsnik comes to the aid of beast boss Bakum on Hive Prom, and it soon becomes apparent that the Mad Dok is feverishly working on something that could change the fate of orc kind forever.
Grotsnik Da Mad Dok is a dark but silly in that orky way book that fully commits to orc logic, science, and aggression. Grotsnik is portrayed as a genuinely terrifying figure when viewed through orc cultural norms. Beneath the humour, the book explores orc society as a self-sustaining engine of violence, where intelligence and brutality coexist comfortably. It's fast, funny, and surprisingly quite insightful about why orcs are so hard to eradicate. This book is extremely entertaining with its silly little orcness, but it comes at the cost of keeping it from competing with the heavier narrative book higher up in the ranks.
Number 7. Fulgrim the Perfect Son by Jude Reed. For too long, the Emperor's children have been denied their birthright. Their once glorious legion has been fractured into disparate war bands, condemned to ravage world after futile world in pursuit of ambition and excess, but no longer.
Fulgrim the Perfect Son is a focused character study of Fulgrim before his fall, centering on pride, insecurity, and the pressure of perfection. Rather than reframing him as misunderstood, the book reinforces that the seeds of corruption were always there. Fulgrim's need for validation and aesthetic superiority becomes his defining weakness. The tragedy isn't sudden, it's more structured, almost planned in a Zinchi way, despite being a Slaanesh prince. Although this book covers a rather dramatic change in Fulgrim, it's more of a psychological, intimate piece of character writing instead of a grand battle or cataclysm.
Number 6. The Siege of Terra, Era of Ruin Anthology. There's a lot of stories and authors in this. I'm just gonna list them off as she wrote them. Introduction by Jacob Youngs. Angels of Another Age by John French. Fulgurite by Nick Kime. Fragments, All We Have Left by Dan Abnett. Ex Libris by John French. System Purge by Gav Thorpe. After the Dawn, The Darkness by Guy Haley. Homebound by Chris Raitt. And The Carrion Lord of the Imperium by Aaron Dembski Bowden. Horus is dead. His heresy is over. The scars of mankind's greatest schism will never fully heal. For those left behind, a new era of ruin is dawning, promising both new beginnings and fresh peril for an Imperium riven with trauma and war.
Era of Ruin is a collection of short stories about the aftermath, collapse, and the decay that comes after a struggled victory. Across multiple narrators from the Imperium, the base is the same. The galaxy is breaking, the old order is failing, there is only bleak survival. No single story dominates, but together they reinforce a bleak status quo where progress is impossible and institutions endure only through inertia. It's Warhammer at its most honest about stagnation in the 41st millennium, rather than conquest and planet-taking. As an anthology of short stories, this is an easier read as you don't have to get super invested for hours per story. It got up to 6th, but I imagine no higher since it's harder to be emotionally invested at the same level as a large novel in short stories.
Number 5. Ashes of the Imperium, The Scouring, Book 1, by Chris Raitt. As the Siege of Terra ends, there are many loose ends, traitors trying desperately to escape, a monumental vacuum of power to fill, and a crumbling galactic government to see to. Those who hold on to power must decide how to wield it, and a new structure must be put in place, all while desires to exact revenge run high.
Ashes of the Imperium is set in the aftermath of galaxy-shaking events. This novel examines an Imperium that technically survived, but is barely functional. Rather than triumph, the focus is on bureaucracy, exhaustion, and moral compromise. Power structures persist, not because they work, but because nothing else can replace them. It's a story about institutions outliving their purpose and crushing those inside them, even at the highest levels, kind of like the late-stage capitalist hierarchy in the Fallout universe. CEOs and management from pre-bombs dropped trying to maintain their status quo in the wasteland. I like this book because it's just sharp, systemic critique of the system. It's deliberately restrained and procedural in tone, but gives a great insight into the bureaucracy outside of raw war.
Number 4. Archmagos by Guy Haley. Belisarius Cawl is the greatest mind of his age, and he has a plan to open up the Attilan Gap to allow safe passage through the Great Rift. In order to complete his work, he travels to a Necron tomb world. In the process, he attracts the attention of something even more dangerous than the ancient Xenos.
Archmagos is a deep dive into Belisarius Cawl as both a savior and an abomination. The novel presents him as a brilliant but deeply untrustworthy character, a symbol of how the Imperium survives by breaking its own rules, like in Ashes of the Imperium. Cawl isn't framed as a hero, but as a problem the Imperium can't afford to solve. The book explores technological heresy as a quiet form of rebellion. It's like the Blue Balls book for Dark Mechanicus fans. It's a dense and very lore-heavy introspection of Belisarius Cawl with huge implications for what it means for the ongoing struggle for technology within the AdMech.
Number 3. Interceptor City by Dan Abnett. With the Imperial forces locked in a grueling war of attrition over the dead hive city of Vesperis, a former ace fighter pilot returns to the cockpit as the Aeronautica risks it all to secure Interceptor City for the Imperium. Interceptor
City is one of the most openly anti-Imperium books in the Black Library. It depicts a society crushed by endless war, where heroism is irrelevant and survival is transactional. The Imperium here is not glorious or tragic, it's suffocating. Dan Abnett has once again shone in his writing, stripping away the grandiose propagandized visuals to show the real human cost of militarized bureaucracy, making this less a war story and more a critique of the system itself. This is the third book in this ranking that contests with the Imperium being a failing system. People tend to look at Warhammer and gravitate towards humans because humans equal the good guys, right? But narratives like this are so uncomfortable and pessimistic in that system that it reminds you that there are no good sides in Warhammer. Art narrates society. A well-deserved third place.
Number 2, Voidscarred by Mike Brooks. Baron Mirren Stormdawn of the Star Splitter's Corsairs allies with the craft world Eldari to deal with rival orc freebooters for plunder and territory. Along the way, he must negotiate a complicated web of connections in the favor of his superiors.
Voidscarred is an Eldari-focused book that balances action with the internal conflicts of the characters, how they explore their unique, but not quite so unique, identities. The fragmentation suffered from the endless battles with their souls and Slaanesh, and survival without romanticizing the decline. The characters feel modern and politically aware, offering a rare non-imperial lens that still feels fully grounded in the 40k's grimdark and unoptimistic tone. In second place, it's really nice to have a non-mainstream faction stand out like this. Another one of the more emotional, connective books on this list.
Number 1, The Dropsite Massacre by John French. Horus has revealed his dark plans, but nobody is prepared for just how far he will go. The force sent to end the War Master's rebellion doesn't realize they are heading towards a slaughter unlike anything the galaxy has ever seen.
Dropsite Massacre is a retelling and reframing of one of the most important betrayals in Warhammer history. The novel emphasizes the confusion, the miscommunication, and the systemic failure that comes with such grand-scaled crusades. The massacre isn't just a turning point for the Imperium, it's proof that it was doomed by its own systems and structures long before Chaos won. The tragedy feels inevitable, not shocking, which makes it resonate far beyond the event itself. Dropsite Massacre has the boon of being an already known event with a lot of lore behind it. It has that giant Warhammer mythic scale storytelling with dense lore that really sets the scene for the entirety of the Imperium at this time, and foreshadows its future failures. If you want to read more about this, I've linked the Warhammer wiki page in the description below. It really is just endless lore. So what's missing? The majority of these books center around already iconic characters during massive lore-important scenarios that assume you already know more than nothing about the 40k universe. These books are about power and survival in the grimmest dystopian settings. There's no Age of Sigmar books in the top 10, or fantasy. For Games Workshop, this shows us two things. Games Workshop has been pushing huge games like Space Marine 2, bringing Titus into main canon rather than a random made-for-game side character that doesn't affect the lore. Try and name a fantasy or Age of Sigmar video game announced this year. Total War Warhammer 3 DLC doesn't count. Honestly, I can't name one, and I think I'm pretty in keeping with Warhammer announcers in all universes. There's a clear favourite of GW, and it's the grimdark of Horus and 40k. So maybe this vote isn't what books were the best written or best story, just more what GW wants to win so it can justify continuing to neglect Age of Sigmar and fantasy. The second thing is that there just weren't as many non-40k or 30k books released this year. Games Workshop is clearly centering its storytelling around 40k and Horus Heresy characters with deep lore clout, like Primarchs, massive world-ending battles, and things with empire-wide consequences. In contrast, AOS books, the events and characters often revolve more around temperate wars with Civ-like politics. They have the same gods and the Chaos Realms, but the Book of the Year crown went to brutal, sprawling, multi-era war stories instead. Looking at the current perceived things GW seems to be focusing on, Dawn of War being allowed to have the first playable Primarch, Lionel Johnson, is a remarkable step for GW in pulling the video games closer to the backbone of canonity that games never had before. Animated series in Warhammer Plus, yes, they're locked behind a paywall, but they are of very high production value, and especially with the Titus Secret Level episode and the Henry Cavill Amazon series hype, they would be silly to not do this. So I'd be fingers crossed on some of these top voted books getting cinematic animations to TLDR them a little. I imagine they make a lot from people buying the physical books, but from a business standpoint it would be smart to translate these into visual media locked behind that subscription. These character-driven stories are easier to carry across from books into tabletop minis to match their written description, video games to play out the scenarios in a more immersive way, and marketing. It's a lot easier to market Titus, a character with a face and backstory and connection to the audience, than it is to sell Ultramarines as a whole. A single recognizable figure does more for a company than a more abstract thing. Space Marine 2 is already thematically aligned. It puts players in the boots of a highly suspicious character in the Imperium, a character with history and narrative weight. Just like the Black Library winners, the game isn't really about the enemy factions on the surface. It's about loyalty to your brothers and the Imperium to a fault, surveillance, and how the Imperium works against itself as a method of desperate self-preservation. They're about the survival of the characters and creating that connection to the audience. Then in the announced Dawn of War 4 Dark Angels reveal, you have the Lion as a playable, walking, talking piece of lore. This is the closest we the consumers have ever had to feel like we're making the choices for the universe, and that's super powerful. It's like we get drip-fed lore through White Dwarf or full-on history to pull us in and emotionally invest in a character, and then the ascension to be able to play that character in a game. This is how to make a loyal fanbase, because there's always something, and there's something for everyone at that subconscious emotional level. Books create attachment, subscription TV and games monetize it, whether video games or tabletop. Yes, you still have to buy books, but they're generally one-time purchases, and GW misses out because of resale and scalpers. Warhammer Plus is a rolling sub, and subs work because people forget to cancel them. And with games, you get endless DLC and cosmetic packs to sell. So the Black Library Book of the Year 2025 winners aren't just about which novel was best. I doubt the majority of voters read every single book and just voted towards stories they already knew from places like Warhammer Wiki and White Dwarf. It tells us that GW is winning. They want 30k and 40k to be their perfect nest egg, so they push it, and then they push it, and they push it, until you get results like this. So then they can justify what the community lovingly refer to as the doubling down on selling out to shareholders by milking characters like Titus as much as they are. If you haven't seen any of the Titus's head imposed on cows or Mad Max Mothers memes, I wish I was you, nothing was held back in those edits. There is no question over whether this trend will continue. It's whether there's still room for anything else. Let me know what you think and which book you believe should have won. Was Dropsite Massacre actually mid and Usharon Mortarch of Delusion the GOAT, or maybe the Shade of Cain? Whether you love Grimdark 40k or miss the broader fantasy worlds, this year's winners show where most readers' hearts are. Already for 2026, we have the announced book releases of Apostle and Death Rider in 40k and First Marshal for AOS. It's also the 10-year anniversary of Age of Sigmar, so I tentatively, perhaps too optimistically, expect a little more love for that IP. If you like this content, subscribe for more, check out my other content, and see you later, bud.